Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today we are going over 14 week number 8 waiver wire claims you need to make. You need to go out and get these guys before your teammates use them against you. I know it might look like it's slim pickings out there on the waiver wire, but trust me, there are some good options. We are starting it off with Rashee Rice. I mean, it's very likely this is going to be Rashee Rice's last appearance on these waiver videos, as his percentage has closed in on that 50 percentile mark that we use in these videos. If you are not already aware, I only usually put players that are under 50% rostered in ESPN leagues. So that's the kind of guidelines that I go by in these videos. We have been preaching Rashee Rice for the past 3 or so weeks now, and he is not letting us down whatsoever. 13.3, 11.2, and 17 PPR fantasy points in his last 3 games. Andy Reid must have been feeling generous today because his playing time got bumped up over 51% of snaps for the first time of the entire year. Rice played on 40 out of a possible 68 snaps on offense, which equals out to 58.8% of snaps. Definitely a step in the right direction, but we still want to see that playing time up even further than that. Kelce was the clear number 1 wide receiver once again in this offense, as expected. But we are seeing that the Chiefs can also roster a number 1 wide receiver, and especially in fantasy football, and hopefully Rashee Rice can keep producing. I think it has to be Rashee Rice emerging as that number 1 right now. He's just been the most consistent out of all the Chiefs wide receivers thus far into the year. Rice also caught another touchdown on Sunday against the Chargers and continues to be Mahomes' favorite target in the red zone, once again behind Travis Kelce. I really feel like Rashee Rice should be rostered in almost every league type right now with how efficient he has been, and it's really surprising that he's not rostered in over 50% of leagues when I am recording this video at the end of week 7. Next up, we have Kareem Hunt. I will say both of these Cleveland running backs had amazing fantasy days against the Colts. Ford put up 17.4 PPR fantasy points, while Hunt scored 15.1, making that 2 straight weeks for Kareem Hunt where he scored over 15 PPR fantasy points. Ford was actually seen in a protective boot after an ankle injury occurred late in that game against the Colts, which could suggest that he misses at least next week against the Seattle Seahawks, if not more time. And if that's not enough reason to grab Kareem Hunt, I will tell you what is. Deshaun Watson also got hurt early on in this game, leaving things up to PJ Walker. And you can really tell that the Browns would like to make PJ Walker's life a lot easier by running the ball if possible. I'm not sure if PJ Walker is really even much of a downgrade at this point, considering how bad Deshaun Watson has looked lately, which is really disappointing considering how much money they gave this man. But the Browns are also a top 10 rushing team so far this season. I would go out and get a piece of that backfield if possible. If you think that the Jerome Ford injury is not that severe, by the way, then go trade for Jerome Ford and take advantage of people that are panicking on him, because like we already went over in past videos, they have a pretty simple playoff schedule as well. Next up, we have Josh Downs. Josh Downs has absolutely been killing it lately. I am very glad that we put him in our Players Ready to Explode video because he is doing just that. And although in week number 6, he couldn't find much room after the catch against the Jaguars, that was not the case at all. In week 7, he had 5 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets. Now, of course, as we've said in the past, I'm not expecting Josh Downs to take over that number 1 role from Michael Pittman Jr. It will be Michael Pittman Jr.'s role for the rest of this season, but that doesn't mean that Josh Downs doesn't have a very clear role on this team, at least in terms of fantasy football. He played on 50 out of 70 snaps, while Pierce and Pittman saw almost every snap in this game, but I'm not too concerned about that as long as he keeps being as effective as he has been these past couple of weeks. Somehow, Gardner Minshew, by the way, I have to just say this, he is pulling off miracle runs. Unbelievable what he is doing with his legs. I didn't really think he had it in him, but he has proven me wrong for sure. Good for him. As an Eagles fan, I have to root for this guy as the backup last season. He is really succeeding as a starter here, which is great to see. Downs also mostly plays in the slot as well and has one of the biggest target separation percentages in all of the league right now. So I am really liking Josh Downs. If he is still available on your waivers, definitely go out and grab him up. Next up is Chuba Hubbard. Hubbard got the start over Miles Sanders since he sat out in week number 6, and he certainly made the most of it. He finished that game with 19 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown. Now, I can't lie to you guys, I haven't been too high on Miles Sanders even since this season started, mostly due to that Eagles offensive line. I think it was making him look a lot better of a runner than he actually is in all reality, and some regression was due to happen, which you've seen it so far. He has been abysmal for fantasy owners so far into this season as to where his average draft position was, and he really relies on passing work this season since the offensive line cannot hold up whatsoever right now, which of course isn't creating any running room for not only Sanders, but also Chuba Hubbard. The problem for Sanders, though, is that Hubbard has produced similar numbers and he can also catch the ball. So Sanders doesn't really have an advantage in either of those categories. This Panthers situation does make me nervous for the rest of the season, but hopefully if you do have Sanders on your team, you go out and at least get Chuba Hubbard as a backup option in case Sanders gets, kind of phased out of this offense. I don't think it will happen completely. This will somewhat be a split backfield throughout the season as long as both are healthy, but maybe the guy you want is Chuba Hubbard. I'm not too sure. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of this Sanders-Hubbard kind of split situation. Next up, we have Tyjae Spears. These Derrick Henry trade rumors are going around. They're swirling once again. Can't say I really trust Derrick Henry 100% at this point in the season, but I can say that Tyjae Spears looks like an elite level handcuff running back at the moment. Spears has been playing a very similar amount of snaps as Derrick Henry on a weekly basis, but it's going to be very hard to really see Tyjae Spears provide great fantasy value unless Derrick Henry does end up getting traded. If Henry were to get traded, then Spears would become, in my opinion, a top tier running back in the league, a top 10 running back, no doubt in my mind. He's currently ranking number 3 in breakaway run rate, top 10 in yards created per touch, and top 10 in fantasy points per touch. Spears is also a very efficient pass catcher, so he is going to be somewhat matchup proof if he does springboard himself into that number 1 running back role for the Tennessee Titans. Next up, we got Curtis Samuel. I will say Samuel dropped somewhat of a mediocre game in week number 7 against the New York Giants, catching 4 passes for just 25 yards. The good news, though, for Samuel is that he saw 8 targets, which was right up there with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. He left the game briefly early on, and then shortly after, he ended up returning. He ended up playing about 20 less snaps than Dotson and McLaurin in this one, but his efficiency once again made up for it. This has been really a trend for him in the past couple of weeks. He plays a significantly less amount of snaps than Dotson and McLaurin, but his overall value is, I would argue, higher than Jahan Dotson's at the moment. The bad news about this situation and the risk that you take every single week starting a guy like Curtis Samuel or even Jahan Dotson for the most part is that the Commanders have a tendency to come out flat. Most of the time, it's in the first half. But this past week against the Giants, it was like the entire game, which was very concerning to see. The only person that I would be 100% confident starting every week, only kind of lineup lock sort of guy in this offense has to be Terry McLaurin. But if you need a secondary streaming option, if a bye week occurs, which it's the bye week bug is killing everybody right now. Okay, so Curtis Samuel, not a bad option to pick up. Next up, we got Roschon Johnson and Dante Foreman. Dante Foreman wants to go out here and drop over 30 PPR fantasy points. That should have been Roschon Johnson's big game. We've been hyping up Roschon the entire time. He gets a concussion. He's out 2 games. It's unfortunate. Listen, all that really does for me, this Foreman big game, is just adds another layer of confusion to this backfield. If Foreman had a bad game, I can almost guarantee you that Roschon comes back from that concussion and dominates touches, but I don't know if that's completely true at this point in time. This is most likely going to be some sort of a split backfield until Khalil Herbert comes off of IR, and then I really don't know what the situation is looking like. Another interesting part about Foreman's performance, though, on Sunday is that he caught 3 passes. In the past, he was not a strong pass catcher at all. So for him to catch 3 passes was a little bit surprising as well. I think he just was kind of launched into a situation here with no other healthy running backs. I mean, Darrington Evans was the backup in this game. I feel like the rest of the season, Roschon Johnson or Dante Foreman, I'm picking Roschon Johnson because I do think he has more upside. But in the short term, I'm really not sure who is going to come out on top. Also, I got to shout out Tyson Bagent for winning his first game. Hopefully he can continue that momentum because he looked pretty good out there. He looked pretty, He was calm, he was cool, he was collected. It was looking like a good time for the Chicago Bears. Maybe Justin Fields hit the bench, buddy. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Maybe. Next up, we got Rasheed Shahid. Shahid once again saw 70% of the snaps against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but couldn't get much going down the field. We saw a very similar problem with Josh Downs last week, as we were just talking about, but then he exploded the next week. Maybe we're going to see a sort of similar situation here in the upcoming week for Rasheed Shahid. That would be absolutely lovely for anybody who picked him up and stashed him. This situation is super frustrating, not only for Shahid, but mainly Chris Olave. He saw 15 targets from Carr last week, Olave that is, but they clearly weren't on the same page whatsoever. Carr just looks like his first read majority of the time is to Alvin Kamara, so that's super frustrating for all these Saints wide receivers when you have them in fantasy. Shahid did see 8 targets, though, in this game, but I don't know if that's the most encouraging thing because Carr ended up throwing the ball 55 total times in that game. Shahid is still a rest of the season stash for me right now because of his inconsistent production up to this point in time, but his playing time rising over the past couple of weeks is definitely a good sign. He's heading in the right direction. He ranks top 5 in average target distance, deep targets, and yards per reception. So he's going to be that deep threat in this offense, while Chris Olave and Michael Thomas are going to be those more, get you the first down type of guys, while Rashid Shaheed is the guy going deep. So if you're going to start Rasheed Shahid in your lineup right now, that's really what you're banking on, is that deep ball touchdown so he can produce some good fantasy points for you. Next up is Jameson Williams. We're moving on from one deep ball-dependent guy to another. He dropped a fat dud, 0.0 PPR fantasy points, but it was a little more promising than it seemed from an outside perspective. He finished with 6 targets and ended up playing on 44% of the snaps, which was a huge increase from last week's percentage of 22%. So he doubled the snap count this week. He doubled his targets this week. This Lions team just came out of this game completely flat and got destroyed because of it, not only on offense, but also on defense. Although Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs both had great fantasy days, Williams, he'll have better days in the future. That's almost a guarantee. This is a stash play for late in the season, hoping that he's going to come on as a flex option with extremely high upside. And the Lions are not going to struggle like that every week. That is not going to become a consistent thing for the Detroit Lions. The deep ball is going to be much more effective, by the way, when the Lions can actually establish a good running game. Next up, we have Dalton Kincaid. Josh Allen was looking for Dalton Kincaid a ton against the Patriots this past week. Saw a season-high 8 targets and turned that into 15.5 PPR fantasy points. The only problem is that he ended up still playing less snaps than Dawson Knox, but of course, he was much more efficient in this game than Knox was. A couple scenarios could develop, at least in my mind, after this game. Number one is that this situation was due to Bill Belichick doing his best job to limit Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, leaving Kincaid open more than normal. Number two is that Kincaid is finally coming on to be that number 1 tight end on this offense that the Bills drafted him to be. With the tight end position being so slim, rostering him as a stash right now could be worth it, especially in deeper leagues. But if he can continue this type of production, that's the only point in time where I would place him in my lineups. As of right now, I don't think he's a weekly start just yet. Next up, we have Devin Singletary. I'm not sure if this is going to be starting a trend or not with these Houston running backs, but in week 6, Dameon Pierce was outsnapped by Devin Singletary 34-21. It's no question that Dameon Pierce has struggled so far this season. He's been very disappointing throughout the 6 games so far as the RB1 on this team, but it's not completely his fault. This offensive line is not giving him too many holes to run through. Singletary was more effective than Dameon Pierce in week number 6, but I'm not really convinced that I want a part of either of these guys in this backfield. If you have Pierce, I would go out and get Devin Singletary just as a backup plan in case he does take over that role, but I would much rather have a piece of this passing offense than the run game in Houston right now. Now we're moving on to a couple guys that are rostered in just over 50% of leagues, but I feel like I have to talk about them quickly in this video. First up is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. JSN thrived in his game where DK Metcalf missed against the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday. He saw his most targets yet this season, along with the most yards so far as well. Honestly, He dropped a few catchable balls. He could have made his day even better, but nobody's going to be complaining about 16.3 PPR fantasy points. The interesting part to me about this game is that JSN lined up more on the outside than normal, while Tyler Lockett actually played more slot snaps. So if that keeps continuing, the Seahawks keep giving him more downfield shots and his potential gets that much higher for the rest of the season. This is a rookie that I feel like could really get going in the second half of the year, so definitely a must-stash type of guy, in my opinion. If anything happens to Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, I mean, if Metcalf keeps missing time, then we got a solid flex option with high upside on our hands with JSN. Next is CJ Stroud. With the way some of these quarterbacks have been performing this season, as of late at least, if CJ Stroud is still available in your league, you need to go pick this guy up and have him on the bench at the very least. He's coming off 2 games against brutal defenses in New Orleans and Atlanta and scored 14.16 fantasy points in each of those games. He's been making Nico Collins and Tank Dell look great on offense when they're both healthy. And now that Stroud's bye week has passed, now that the Texans' bye week has passed, you have a solid quarterback 2 on your roster if you do decide to go get him. He has been great up to this point as a rookie, and there's a chance he could get even more comfortable. He probably will get even more comfortable throughout the rest of this season and perform even better. Also in the fantasy playoffs, he ends up going against the Tennessee Titans, 2 out of the 3 games, who, by the way, let up a ton of passing yards. So CJ Stroud is a must-grab quarterback, in my opinion, off waivers. Last but not least, I want to end it off with Joshua Palmer. Palmer has been solid in the absence of Mike Williams due to his ACL injury, keeping him out the entire rest of the season, while Quentin Johnston has just fallen flat. He has not been what a lot of fantasy owners drafted him to be at the moment, at least. Palmer dropped 18.3 PPR fantasy points against a good Chiefs defense, I must say, has at least 7 targets in his last 4 games, and you know exactly what to expect from Joshua Palmer. I'm going to be honest, I have been really impressed with what I've seen from Palmer these past couple of games, the catches that he ends up making. In the game a week ago, he caught so many balls against the Dallas Cowboys that were called back due to penalties. He honestly might have had like 12 or 13 targets in that game, but 6 of them got called back, so he ended up with 7. He also has shown to provide a great deep threat ability for this Chargers offense. Another positive is that he played on all but 1 snap in week number 7, which was the most out of the entire Chargers team, and ran the most routes alongside Keenan Allen. There is no reason in my mind why he shouldn't continue producing at a great fantasy value. There is absolutely no reason that I could see why he can't keep producing great fantasy numbers, playing very well behind Keenan Allen, who is, of course, going to be that number 1 wide receiver in LA for the rest of the season. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to, as always, drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Also, quickly, if you haven't already followed the Twitter, I'll leave the link in the description and the pinned comments down below. Also, I'll be leaving the timestamps for all these people in the description as well if anybody is interested. Anyways, have a great day and peace out.